Okay, well, it looks like the attendee rate is kind of slowing down a little bit of the new ones jumping in. It's only a couple of minutes after. We'll go ahead and get started. So again, good afternoon to those out on the East Coast, and good morning to those on the West and further West time zones. And thanks again for joining us on your lunch hour if you're in the middle of our country. My name is Adrian Pearmine. I'm with the transportation consulting firm DKS Associates. I'm our National Director for Connected Vehicles and Smart Cities and Connected Vehicles. And I will be introducing, actually I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. Our friends at Pacheco, Koch and Texas Department of Transportation invited us, DKS, to work together on some congestion analysis and safety analysis projects. And collectively, we used some connected vehicle data, and we would like to present to you the findings of some of this work and start to show how we're excited about the use of connected vehicle data to really change the paradigm of both congestion analysis and especially transportation safety analysis. On the safety side of things, historically, we've been a very reactive industry where we've really had to essentially wait until accidents are happening and people are dying to then go look at historical data to identify hotspots and problems on our transportation network, and then go figure out the solution and implement it, and then oftentimes wait for another couple of years worth of data to see whether we solved the problems that we were trying to solve. And I think we all know we'll never get to vision zero if we have to stay in that reactive mode. We really need to start to look at new data sets and explore opportunities to become a lot more proactive in our safety analysis. And the same applies to congestion management and mobility analysis. So with that, I'm going to ask Daniel and Jennifer to introduce yourselves and start our presentation off. Then we'll be having Charlie, one of my colleagues from DKS's Austin, Texas office, talk a little bit more about safety data. And Eimar from Moonshadow Mobile is going to be doing a bit more of a deep dive into the data itself and what we can expect and what we're excited about in the future of connected vehicle data. So with that, I think I'll hand it off to you, Daniel.
How's it going, everyone? I'm Daniel Cardenas. I am with the Texas Department of Transportation, the San Antonio District, and I am the Assistant District Traffic Engineer.
Howdy, I'm Jennifer Butcher. I'm with Pacheco Koch. I'm the Director of Traffic for the Public Engineering Sector. And we have a firm of we are a full service civil engineering firm of over 250 people in the state of Texas. So I will pass it back to Daniel to talk about the project.
I guess to give a little bit of background on the project itself, so the overall purpose of this, the project and this task was a congestion study. And so basically what we were doing is trying to identify simple operational improvements that provided the greatest benefit for our area. So the San Antonio District is made up of 12 counties that surround our biggest metropolitan area, which is Bexar County. And so for this task, we had a budget of about $40 million. And some of the items of improvement that we identified and looked at were signal timings, the addition of turn lanes, restriping and changing of lane assignments, and then as well as overall just signal modifications and upgrades themselves. And then, as I mentioned, the San Antonio District is made up of 12 counties, but we narrowed it down then to 3 counties, which included Bexar County, Comal County, and Guadalupe County. So these are more of our, I guess, our areas with greater population. So it encompasses about 2,500 square miles. And so as we identified these study areas, we did both look at off-system and on-system and off-system roadways. So obviously state-to-state route or state route to local route. So, and then with any project, I mean, obviously the first thing that we had to do is a major coordination effort, not only with TxDOT, but with the county, as well, and then the city staff from the municipalities around San Antonio. And so from there, we identified 26 intersections and corridors which had known previous issues. And in conjunction with that, we also pulled the crash data, the CRIS data, and from there, we identified the top 15 intersections in each of the 3 counties. And our main focus was rear end and side swipe locations. And then from there, we went on to do our congestion review, where we utilized speed maps by time of day. And then obviously COVID has had a major effect on everyone and the way of life and the way we've gone about things, especially in engineering. And so when we first kicked off this project, it was right before COVID, I guess, started affecting the US more and more. And so that did kind of throw a wrench into how we were able to collect the data. It wasn't as simple as just going out and getting traffic counts and throughout, or doing any type of studies that we would normally do based on the trends and the decreased traffic of COVID. And then as well, another challenge that we had also faced for quite some time was a ransomware event that occurred at TxDOT. So with all of that happening and all that going on, we needed to find alternative means of collecting traffic data. And so this is kind of where it all, I guess, tied together and played out. So.
All right, so I'm going to take it over from here. Even before COVID had hit, obviously we could not collect traffic data at that point because the traffic had changed so much. And one of the other challenges is when TxDOT had the malware attack, they lost access to all of the traffic data from their 24-hour counters that were up. But even before that, take into account that we had 3 counties with a whole lot of traffic data. Just ordering standard turning movement counts and data collection was going to be pretty expensive. So we had even started kind of vetting some of these options beforehand. And some of the data that we had looked at was the streetlight data, the TomTom data, and the Wejo data. It was just kind of 3 of the platforms that had floated to the top. And, all of these data sources, provide great options. But what we were trying to do is figure out what was the best option for the project that we were looking at. With the streetlight data, we could get speed data, 24-hour counts, and turning movement counts, but it put that data into 1-hour buckets. Which keeps us from being able to calculate the peak hour factor at the intersections. Plus the price structure at the time that we were looking at it was going to be really expensive to get a whole lot of intersections within these 3 county regions. The TomTom data, when we looked at it, is more cost effective, but it was only giving us the speed data and the 24-hour counts. Whereas when we started looking at the Wejo data, this provided individual journey information. So with the data set we have, it is every GM vehicle that was manufactured since 1990. One of the things we liked about that was, since it's vehicle since 1990, we didn't have to worry about socioeconomic differences, since that incorporates older vehicles. And it tracks those vehicles from when they turn their car on until when they turn their car off. So that individual journey information was really interesting to be able to look at as a whole to our network. The data was also, we could have it subdivided into 15-minute buckets, which we were hoping would be able to allow us to calculate those peak hour factors for each of the approaches when we were looking at the turning movement counts. And the data did also include all of the speeds as the driver is going for that lane, and also providing some more detailed vehicle for the lane by lane tracking of the vehicle.
Jennifer, I think you've accidentally muted yourself when you were switching slides, or we lost the audio somehow.
Okay, I think audio may be back now. All right.
You're back.
Thanks. So there's 2 different types of data types with the Wejo. You have the single event data and the continuous measurement data. The single event data is something that occurs just at one point of time. So the examples of that type of data that you can get with the Wejo is the harsh braking data. So when you slam on your brakes, we know if the airbag is deployed, when you turn your wipers on or off, when your seatbelt, you unbuckle or buckle. We have those exact points of when those instances occur. But with the continuous measurement data for those journeys from when you turn your vehicle on until you turn your vehicle off, we have data such as speed as you drive faster and slower along the route, and then also the direction you're heading, and then using all that information to obtain your travel time along corridors. So just to give more of a graphic image of the two different types of data sources, you've got your continuous, and I'm sorry, I put these in the wrong spot. This is actually your single event data. So you'll see that those occur at exact locations for these, for the hard braking and the hard accelerations. And for the continuous measurement, you'll see all of these little data sources as you're going along these routes. So these are your journeys of the people, of a vehicle driving, and their speed along that route. So with everything in life, there are pros and cons to everything. So what are the pros of the Wejo data? For our study, it was more of a cost-effective way to get enough data for 3 county regions. You can get your origin and destination information from where they started and follow the routes that they're taking. You can also look at those lane by lane data, which I'll kind of get into a little bit more, but that really helped us with Q links. And we also have those hard braking and fast acceleration information of where it occurs. And then the turning movement counts. I can kind of go into that a little bit more. We were not able to get the accuracy on the turning movement counts we wanted, but what we could use is that queuing data that we would collect based on the speeds and use that to calibrate our turning movement counts. And I'll go into that more in some future slides. And you know, the cons, when you have continuous measurement data, that's a lot of data. It's very intensive. And we needed a platform that could host and help us process and review that data. And it's also, it's not an even capture rate. So it's not as easy as, you know, ordering turning movement counts and immediately having that data. So some of the information we found from the hard braking hotspots is, the image on the top is our speed data for 0 to 30 miles per hour. So if you'll notice the speeds right here, you start seeing queuing, and these are all actually signalized intersections in Castroville, Texas. And then this is our hard braking data. The blue is the hard braking events, the deceleration, and the orange is the acceleration, or the, you know, stomp on your gas. So what we are noticing is in the AM, we are getting a lot of hard braking data in fast accelerations at the traffic signals heading eastbound. And when we kind of zoom out along this corridor, we are noticing in the PM peak hours that in the opposite direction, you're seeing the westbound traffic of everyone coming home. And what we are noticing is at every signalized intersection, we have had a lot of hard braking and hard acceleration. So this was something that we had recommended that we may need to look at coordinated signal timing improvements to kind of decrease the annoyance of the drivers based on the data that we're looking at. So as I mentioned, I was kind of go into the turning movement count calibration a little bit more. So with the turning movement counts, and because we didn't have access to a lot of the data that TxDOT normally collects, we reached out to, you know, different firms to find out who had collected data, turning movement counts in February 2020, which would correspond with the 1 month of the Wejo data that we had purchased for February 2020. We found 5 intersections that we were able to obtain turning movement counts, and we calibrated, kind of looked at the data that we are pulling from Wejo versus these turning movement counts, and we are finding that the capture rate varied anywhere from 1 to 12% on various approaches and the actual turning movements themselves. We ended up, based on the data, using an overall 6% capture rate to help calibrate the data that we are pulling out to get to real life. But what we found is we could actually use is the speed data to help calibrate the information so that you can see the cues. So this is just a graphic showing, you know, in one of the study areas we are looking at, all the speeds from 0 to 5 miles per hour. So you'll notice we actually have congestion during the peak hour heading in one direction, and as most places, the other direction's pretty empty. And you can see all of the speed data and how far these cues are located. And even with this one, if you notice, it's your left turn cue that's super heavy, but the right turn cues are pretty short. So this is the information that we would use to better calibrate our turning movement counts. One of the intersections that we found that we are studying was the intersection of I-10 at Interstate 10 at Huebner. And this is all of our AM data from 7 to 8 a.m. And one of the things that we actually found pretty funny is we were sitting here looking at this, noticing that we had a barbecue restaurant during the AM peak hour that had a long drive-through. What we ended up discovering is that Texans apparently really love breakfast tacos, and breakfast tacos are very popular at this Bill Miller's in San Antonio. So if anyone's going to San Antonio, check out their breakfast tacos based on the data. Something else that we were looking at was what kind of caught our eye is most U-turn lanes do not have long congestion. So we started looking at this information and looking at this U-turn and realized that we had a major corporate campus over here, and the drivers in the morning were entering this campus and coming through this U-turn lane. When we were calibrating our data, we were actually able to zoom in and noticed that the U-turn, based on if you notice the zoom in data, this U-turn kind of starts shifting over, and it was starving that left turn lane. So we used some of this information while calibrating the model and also looking at what improvements we could do in terms of lane extensions. And with this intersection had so much congestion, we actually had to start looking at alternative intersections to solve the problem. One of the other projects that we are doing besides the congestion studies, we were looking at a safety study along Wurzbach Parkway in the San Antonio region. And we analyzed all the crashes. One of the intersections that floated to the top, we had unfortunately had a couple of fatalities at this eastbound exit to Vista del Norte off of Wurzbach Parkway. We had a fatality in this location of drivers that were driving too fast and missed this turn. And we had another fatality upstream of a driver who had stopped in the exit lane with no shoulder location and was hit by the drivers. With that information, we actually did pull hard braking data also at this exit, and you will notice all these red dots are the locations where drivers were slamming on their brakes before getting to this curve. So we did look at options with closing this eastbound exit. Is that feasible? And the thing that we noticed by comparing the Wejo data using the origin destination of all the drivers entering this region, 90% of the people from the eastbound entering are actually coming from this exit as opposed to this exit that we were hoping to close. So with only 10% of the people using this access, it definitely made sense to go ahead and close this exit. Not to mention when we closed it, based on the geometry in that area, it would allow us to shoulder for anyone who needed an emergency shoulder for breakdowns. With those improvements, here's an aerial. This is the shoulder that we are staying to close off, simple striping changes and some roadway removal to go ahead and close that was something that we had suggested as a potential future improvement. It was cut from our project just because we were on a short timeline, did not have the time for the environmental impacts to remove this one. So that is the end of my presentation. I'll pass that to Adrian.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Danielle. One thing I should have mentioned when we were kicking off the webinar, Peter Park had figured it out, but I should have pointed out that you have a question column over in the GoToWebinar panel. And so please don't hesitate to ask any questions, and I'll be handling those. The questions so far were just around whether we're going to be sharing the presentation and sharing the recorded webinar, and we'll be sending a note out to everybody that registered when they're available. So with that, Charlie, I'm going to hand it over to you, and please don't forget to introduce yourself before you start talking about your part of the presentation.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Charlie Henry. I work for DKS Associates. We're part of this project team with Pacheco, Koch, and Moonshadow. And yeah, I can absolutely, I grew up in San Antonio, so I can absolutely, verify that those Bill Miller drive-thrus can get super crazy in the morning with breakfast tacos. Yeah, so as Jennifer mentioned, we had identified, I think, 15 intersections per county, and number 7 on that list was Loop 1604 Pacheco Road, as part of the high crash intersections that we had noticed. So currently it is a overpass where you have the frontage roads, but it did not always look like this. Actually, only about 5 years ago now, it was an at-grade signalized intersection. So that construction took place, and we're interested in seeing what changes happened to crashes. So that was part of what we looked at here. Looking back at the crash history at this intersection, we can see that there were about 1,200 crashes that took place within the vicinity of the intersection. There was 1 fatality, 20 seriously injured, and roughly 13% of the crashes were rear ends. And we can see that during construction, there's actually a peak here in 2016, 2018 of crashes, which is unfortunate, but that's typical when you have construction. And then in recent years, it has sort of returned back to normal. And also we noticed that the percent of crashes that were rear ends actually have increased over time, after the construction was completed, which makes logical sense since now there's an overpass. So now, the highway speed vehicles are now separated from the intersection. And that's typically a good thing, that you want more rear ends than T-bone or, side or angle crashes. But this is all good. We know that there's a problem here, but what exactly is the solution, right? We can, I think we had a pot of money here that TxDOT was really interested in trying to find the best way to spend it on sort of low cost improvements. So we know there's a crash problem here. How do we fix it? So the typical ways of going about it is, going back to the crash data and saying, well, we have 13% rear ends, maybe there's something that we can do with that, or identifying different trends in the data. You can go out to the field work, do some field observations, take measurements, get experts out in the field and see what their opinions are about the operations of the intersection. That can be influenced by COVID, right? Because we don't really have very representative traffic right now, but of course there's technology you can deploy. There's different cameras that detect near miss crashes and different things like that. And of course there's documents and manuals and all sorts of things you can reference to help you determine what the solutions could be. And today I'm really discussing just one extra tool in this toolbox, which is the connected vehicle data. And as Jennifer mentioned just recently here, it really comes in 2 flavors, 2 different bins. One is sort of the single event data, the hard braking, the hard acceleration. And I'll highlight the hard braking because that seemed the most natural and obvious use case for safety use. It's potentially identifying safety problems. And then you have the continuous measurements, or the breadcrumb data. Every 3 seconds, we have the location and the speed of the vehicles. So it's really comparing these 2 data sets. Yeah.
If I could just jump in here real quick, there's been a couple questions about the hard braking data itself. And do you know how Wejo has defined that to us, what what's triggering that, what that means, and if not you, Eimar is going to be doing a bit more of a deep dive into the data, so you can pass it off to him too.
Yeah, I can look that up. I think we had it in an email somewhere where we actually had the actual numbers.
This is Eimar speaking. It's any deceleration or acceleration over 2.67 meters per second.
Sorry, Charlie, I'll try not to interrupt. I'll try not to interrupt you in the middle of your presentation anymore.
Fine.
Just while you had the slide.
Yeah, and a good thing about that harsh braking, hard deceleration, whatever you want to call it, data is that it also records the speed that it took place at. So here we have, you might be traveling at 10 miles an hour, having a harsh brake. Obviously, that's different than here on the main lanes. If you're traveling, it looks like it's under construction in this satellite image, but it was actually completed at the time that we have the data here in February of 2020. But the harsh braking, you can look at the speed. So you can sort of compare and contrast and say, well, people down here at the intersection are slowing down because there's an intersection. It's kind of hard to say if that's necessarily a safety issue. But like I said right here, you see a lot of people slowing down for the intersection, and it's quite low speeds, some red here. But further back from the intersection, and also I should point out these little driveways, there's people slowing down for the driveways to go into HEB or whatever's over there. But we also noticed this big cluster of hard braking that was actually further back from the intersection, and there's no driveways or ramps or anything over here that would explain this. So that really drew my attention to it, and I went to Google Street View because we don't need to do field work anymore. You can just hop down Google Street View, and that's sort of where that triangle is here. And you can see that there's a bit of a roller here. There's like a hill. We're at the crest of a hill here, and that's where a lot of these hard braking events are taking place. So that sort of piqued our interest, and we can go back to the breadcrumb data, the journey-based data, and we can also color that by speed. So you can see here on the main lanes, people are traveling fast, which makes sense, and on the side street, they're traveling slower. But this right lane here, the southbound right turn lane here is actually red. So people are queuing up during the PM peak hour here, 4 to 6 p.m. And it's actually spilling back from the little turn pocket and going up the hill. So people are braking because there's a queue on that hill that they can't see, and they're braking at pretty high speeds, which is a pretty serious safety issue. Here's another view of it. Looking at the distance from the stop bar, you can see a ton of these hard braking events taking place near the stop bar where the signal is. And then further back you get, because it happens in the PM peak hour here, the dark color shows the hard braking events that occur during the PM. There's a greater share of that. So, that queue is maybe only available for maybe 30 minutes, 20 minutes a day. And that's where a lot of those hard braking events are occurring. So that's sort of what really drew our attention to there. So now we've identified another problem, right? We have this intersection where we know there's a problem. We've identified the sightline issue. So what is the solution? So we've recommended that TxDOT go out and install signage, potentially a queue detection system. They have these flashing beacons that can be hooked up with the signal to flash if it's going to turn red, or potentially even changing the design of this hill to make it the sightline issue not as bad. So that was our solution there. Also, some other considerations about this data that I thought was important was that we're largely available connected vehicle data. It's largely available that the pre-COVID data exists. So this is something that we may not have been able to observe in the field because it's so congestion dependent. You wouldn't have expected the queue to maybe go up that hill, extend back 800 feet or so from the signal, unless it was normal traffic conditions. There's no travel cost. We can just stay at our home offices or the district offices and we can look at the data. And of course, you don't have to walk around on the side of the freeway, which is also dangerous. And as Jennifer pointed out, you can look down to the lane level almost. You can see individual lanes where people are slowing down because of a queue. It's not just, oh, that, I don't know, it's not like Google Maps where it just says, the whole link is red or whatever. You can see, oh, that left turn pocket is really filling up, or that right turn. So that's really useful. And you can sort of validate your concerns, right, through that. And of course, there's instant reporting, right? If we went out and we put a sign out there, we made some changes at the intersection, maybe some signal timing changes, we could go and see the impacts of that next week, or even in real time. So that's what's really beneficial about this. So that is all I had. I will hand it back to, I guess, Adrian. You're gonna hand it off to Eimar.
I will be in just a quick second. One thing we were trying to do as part of this as well was correlate the hard braking data with crash data. And one of the challenges that we found, the way that TxDOT stores their data for personal privacy reasons, loses a lot of the granularity of where the actual crash happened, in what lane and what direction. And we understand why they stored their data the way they have historically. But we're going to be looking to continue to do that kind of validation between hard braking and crash data. Darcy Bullock and the team over at Purdue have been doing some really interesting research in this space, and we're very excited about the potential of using both that granular journeys data, as what Wejo calls it, as well as this harsh braking and rapid acceleration data to start to identify areas where we think accidents might be happening before the accidents are actually happening. And then as the last bullet here that Charlie points out, once you go and do a fix of any kind out in the field, you can basically start seeing the results the next day when looking at this data. So we're really excited about all of that. So with that, Eimar, I am going to set you up as the next presenter here. And I'm going to be asking you some questions, Eimar, if you don't end up hitting them as part of your presentation around, we already talked about the harsh braking data. We'll talk a little bit about privacy and the way that Wejo handles that and the way that we handle privacy, as well as some of the calibration when we get down to some of these really low vehicle speeds and we're seeing a lot of dots on the map. What are we doing in terms of calibration? And I think we can kind of address that in the Q&A section, but off to you, Eimar.
Yeah, so my name is Eimar Boesjes. I'm a CEO and one of the founders of Moonshadow Mobile. As Jennifer mentioned, you procure this data from Wejo. You're literally talking about billions of waypoints and millions of trips. So you need a platform to store that in. We have developed a platform for that. It's called DB for IoT, the database for the Internet of Things. And we work very closely with Wejo in collecting this data and making it available for analytic purposes. So just a very simple backgrounder, vehicles are connected, mobile phones are connected, transit is connected, and all of these moving objects generate data, and that data is sent into the cloud. And as Jennifer mentioned, there's two types of data that we receive from Wejo. It's the single events, the harsh brakes, the hard stops, and it's the continuous measurements, basically a series of points. And what we can do is we get values for speed, heading, and a number of other things for every point. But we can also, because the Wejo data is so exact, it reports every 3 seconds, we can also compare one point to the previous point. So this is what it looks like. Jennifer showed this. The blue dots, light blue dots, are the hard accelerations. The purple ones, the harsh brakes. And the continuous measurement data. What you see here, which is interesting, is this is visualized by speed. Red being the slowest, yellow, medium, and then green, the fastest speeds. And what you see is it's 3-second interval data, so the distances are larger the moment the vehicles move faster. So the single event data, there's usually not much historic context. You get one measurement, one event. So airbag deployed, braking engaged, things like that. The continuous measurements, you get a point, with Wejo every 3 seconds. So the interesting thing there is you can go back in time with the continuous measurement data and look at what that vehicle or a series of vehicles was doing just before something happened. So one of the things I'll be talking about is, apart from these different types of data, what's happening in this industry and what's coming to us. So a number of car manufacturers, a number of OEMs have announced that all of their vehicles will be connected vehicles, as of a couple of years from now. So on the single event data, as well as on the continuous measurement data, we'll have more OEMs. Each of them will have more vehicles, and we have more columns. And a column is a field, a type of data. So with the single event data, as well as with the continuous measurement, what we need to do always at our end, at Moonshadow's end, is we need to fuse it. We need to combine that data with other sources of data. And one of the really interesting things with the continuous measurement data is that we really want a high frequency as possible. So one of the things we do at Moonshadow is we derive additional data from these data streams. We compare different points. We compare waypoints with their origins and destinations, and we can combine it with a number of other data sets. So what I see coming, and we work very closely with Wejo and others, what we see coming is additional information like exterior temperature, which will allow us to create temperature maps of road segments, fuel consumptions, autonomous braking, of course, emergency braking, that's a major piece of information, but also things like seatbelt change or occupancy change, wipers turned on automatically, which suggests that it's raining, so we can complement those those temperature and environmental maps of the roads. So on the measurement data, what we do is by comparing two consecutive points, and with Wejo, the 3-second interval allows us to do that. And what we would really like to see, of course, is 1 second interval or even faster. But at the same time, that means the data is growing by that much as well. So we're now, one of the things we learned from this project is that we needed to generate more information from the measurement data. So we're now we've built the technology to automatically look at the speed change per second or the speed change per meter, the heading change. We can generate jerk information on each individual waypoint. So here's what that looks like. So this is an example of Orange County in California. So what we did here is we took the deceleration by comparing each two consecutive waypoints, and we looked at any deceleration over 40 kilometers in 3 hours. And so these are all the locations where this happened over a 2-week period, as you can see over here. We can display that over maps. We can also generate graphics from this. So what you see here is how many of those events did we see on the different days. And then here in this graphic over here, this bar chart in blue, you see what the distribution is over the day. And so you see that, of course, in the morning, early hours, there's not much traffic, so there aren't too many of these, and then it jumps up. And what you see here, this is immediately, when I look at a bar chart like this is immediately suspect. And what you always have is with these data sets with billions of, literally billions of waypoints representing millions of trips, you always need to look out for data anomalies. And so within our platform, within DB for IoT, you can identify these things and then make sure you exclude data anomalies from your analyses. You can zoom in. So here we're looking at one area, and what jumps out, for instance, this area over here is a lot of harsh breaks in the curves. And what you can do then is just look at this in detail and see it's a curve and a lot of harsh breaks, right before that intersection. So it may be a similar situation to what, I don't have a Google Street View of this, but it may be a similar situation where people simply don't see that traffic light as they are going through this curve. Instead of using the satellite imagery as a backdrop, you can switch to look at a road. Instead, on the road map, we often use OpenStreetMaps because it's inexpensive, it's free, as a background layer. So this is sort of one of the things I mentioned earlier. This is sort of the ecosystem as it is developing. So what we've learned in these projects is we never deliver the Wejo data by itself. The data always needs to be combined with other sources of data. And of course, one of the things is maps. Not only do we use the maps as a background, you also need to snap the data to the road segments so you can do queries per road segment. Then local data, what was a game day, or what was another day where there was an event. Incident data, you need to combine that. Census and weather, of course, are important as well. And then cameras and counts. So we combine these data sources, and these are some examples. So here we took the two sources of data from Wejo, harsh breaks, harsh events. That is the separate data set, and then we combined it with the speed data from the continuous measurements, from the journeys, the breadcrumb data. And what you see here, this is Portland, Oregon, is slow speeds going over this bridge, fast acceleration merging into traffic here. And in this lane here is a feeder that comes off I-405, another freeway, and you see fast brakes because it's merging with this traffic. Same here, coming out of a tunnel here, going towards downtown Portland, harsh brakes on the bridge because there's a traffic light there. So this is combining the two data sources from Wejo. Another thing that we did
Eimar, if you could, Eimar, actually, if you could go back 2 slides to the one where you show the ingestion of the data from multiple different sources. This might be a good, the one previous to this. This might be a good spot to answer Daryl Swenson's question. He asked, how does the connected vehicle data supplement, integrate with, or even override traditional 24-hour tube count and turning movement count data? I put a response into the chat bar that was kind of also playing off one of the points that Jennifer brought up earlier, which is that the connected vehicle data is really just a sampling. And what we don't know is what percentage at any given time on any given roadway that sampling is. And so we do not see at this point in time anyway, while the sample rates are still pretty low, that this Wejo data can replace the 24-hour tube count or other volume count data. It really augments it. And so if you have good count data and you have it time stamped, again, whether it's tube or microwave or whatever you're using, you really want to bring those two together. And then that allows you to know at that given location at that given time what percentage of the vehicles that you're actually seeing are what the representation is. And then that helps you make the more insightful decisions. And I think that was the point that Jennifer was saying too, is that you see a pretty wide range in sample rate even over the course of the day at a given location. So does that fully answer the question, or is there anything else that we wanted to say to that? I guess I'm.
So yeah, we recently completed a project for 6 states on the East Coast where we had a live feed for 2.5 million vehicles from Wejo, and we scaled up using scaling factors that have been developed by UMD in real time. So it's a very interesting field, and as more and more vehicles are on the road, a larger percentage of the vehicles is connected, this data will become much more representative. What we did here in yellow, we also consumed in, we imported into DB for IoT 10 years of CRIS data from TxDOT. That's shown in yellow. In blue, the Wejo heartbreaks. So visually, you can compare where incidents were occurring and where heartbreaks were occurring. One of the problems we run into, and we always run into challenges when we start combining data sets, is that, as was mentioned earlier, the CRIS data is actually snapped to the center line of the road, so you can't see what direction. Another very important thing, of course, is working with weather data. This is just an image, so this is not actual full integration. NASA has a beautiful series of images on a per day basis, and we can combine that. And what we're really looking for is a complete fusion at some point for the projects that require that, where you can actually start to do queries where you say, I want to look at all the harsh breaks that were happening on a rainy day versus a sunny day. So, and then to end, one of the other things that you can do with this data, and this data probably for the San Antonio region represents roughly 6% of the vehicles. So what you see here is we can play back things that happen. So every dot that you see here really represents, you should read that as, you know, representing, you know, 14 or so or 15 vehicles. So what I'll do is I'll go to a moment where an incident happened, and this is an animation. So what we see here is all these dots are green, full speeds, you know, on this freeway over here. And then what we see here at, you know, 1823 on February 8, 2020, you see a yellow dot, deceleration, a lower speed, and a red dot, much lower speed on the southbound lanes. And let's take a look what happens, you know, 30 seconds later. Now we see a lot more red happening in both directions. So both directions are affected now. And if you jump even further, now you see stopped vehicles. And what you can do is you can play this back as an animation. This event actually took 90 minutes to clear. And you can see exactly when and where the delays, the slow speeds were occurring. And you see those flyers go out, because what you're seeing is this is sped up. You know, every second of animation is a minute in reality. So you can really see which lanes were affected at what time and how the whole event developed and when it was cleared up. So that that's my presentation. Adrian, want to hand it back over to you. Maybe there's some more questions of things that people are interested in learning about.
Yeah, there's been a bunch of them coming in here, Eimar. Could you talk about the privacy issues? Obviously, with such granular data, when you can trace an individual vehicle, if you were able to trace it from the very beginning to the very end of journeys, you could literally see where home appears and where office appears, and get into some privacy issues. So how does Wejo handle that?
So what we do, and it's a very good question, and we're struggling with it, because it's very easy for us to completely obfuscate the data. So it's very easy for us to say we're chopping off some precision at the last, 30 seconds or 200 meters, 200 yards of the data. That's very easy for us to do. The problem is you lose the precision then for places where you don't want to lose the precision. So what we don't know, what is difficult for us to know, is whether a beginning location or an end location is a home location or an office parking structure. And with the parking structure, you often want to analyze it and see, well, where are people coming from? So we're working on technology to obfuscate the data where you don't want to, be able to identify people, but to still, be able to give people that insight, when they look at at analyzing, where people were parking, or the example that Charlie and Jennifer gave about how many breakfast tacos are being consumed, at a certain location in the morning. So it's a struggle between the usefulness and the privacy issues.
So one of the things that we kind of jumped right into the data without really talking about the data source and the relationship. So could you talk a little bit, Eimar, about the where this data is coming from and how our partners at Wejo would answer that?
Sure, absolutely. So Wejo has relationships directly with the OEMs. They started off with one OEM. All of this data was coming from a single OEM. They're now onboarding a number of other OEMs. So what I really like about the Wejo data is it's pure connected vehicle data from the OEMs. It's not mixed with data coming from mobile phones. It's not mixed with data from other sources, so you know what you have. And so a number of issues that you have when you look at data from mobile devices is it's very difficult. If you have an iPhone and an Android device and an iPad in your car, all three devices may be reporting their location and the movement, and that vehicle may be counted 3 times. That's not a problem you have with the Wejo data. The other thing which is just really changed the way we can use this data is the 3-second interval. All the other data sources that we've worked with in the past were roughly 45-second average interval of the reporting. So you would get 1 point every 45 seconds. Well, you can't see harsh braking anymore. You can't see deceleration anymore. You can't see where exactly on a roadway segment something was happening. So this is collected by the vehicles. It's sent in real time to the OEM servers. They send it to the Wejo servers. Wejo sends it to us. We make it available to the clients, and we can do that in real time for millions of trips if needed.
And so, Steve Carver, I hope that answers your question about the needs for calibration of this data. So even if cars are going at a low speed, we're not worried about double or triple counting. We know that data is coming from an individual car. So it's very different than data that's coming from a count station or something like that. Brian Frillo, I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, is asking the all-important question about the percentage of penetration. He mentioned that Wejo's website lists 10.3 million active vehicles. Are you able to identify the number of connected vehicles providing data in individual studies, total number, or as a percentage of traffic volumes? I know that's something that we're constantly asked to look into, and again, sorry to be directing almost all the questions to Eimar, but that's where they're going.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So for this project, I believe the total count was 3 or 4 billion waypoints. We usually have about 1,000 waypoints per journey, per trip. So yes, we do have the exact number of trips. We have the exact number of waypoints. We don't know the penetration, the sample size, what percentage that represents. Wejo, as well as ourselves, we're constantly looking at this. I think the 6% that Charlie mentioned for the San Antonio area, that sounds very plausible. We did the project that we did on the East Coast in the 6-state region, going from Florida all the way up to North Carolina. I think we were at 5% there. We did some tests there. Keep in mind, every month, older vehicles are taken off the road, new vehicles are sold, and many of the new vehicles are now connected vehicles. So this percentage is increasing all the time.
Yeah, and so there's a few different questions about, again, the data source, where it's coming from, and Wejo doesn't want to list off their exact partnerships. That's kind of part of their privacy with their partners. But as Eimar was saying, started off with one major OEM that they're getting their data from. They have a number of new agreements and will be adding more and more OEMs into that list. What we can tell you is that the data really is that individually owned vehicle. So this is not, it's skewed in a certain direction, and you need to be aware of that when you're using this data. These are essentially individual passenger vehicles, not freight, not trucks. So that part's important. But the good news is, as they sign up new OEMs and as each year goes by, a higher percentage of every vehicle coming off the assembly line is a connected vehicle. So we can only watch those numbers and that penetration rate go up higher. Another question came in. You mentioned snapping Wejo points to segments. What network do you use?
So we are using OpenStreetMaps, but we can use any network, any road network that you like. We can also pull road network information directly from a DOT's GIS system. And then features are enabled, we can go a lot further in integrating that. But for this project here, we use OSM, for the road snapping. And then we use the freely available Esri satellite imagery as another background layer.
Yeah, there's another question. Have you thought about normalizing the events with the movements to produce rates? Honestly, I'm not
that's
to train over.
No, but I should have. That's a really good one. Yeah. So technically, there's no problem. We can definitely do that. Yeah. So
another question came in. I think we've only got one minute left. If we do have we schedule this for just an hour, right?
Yeah.
If I remember right. Okay. So I'll get this last question in there, and then we'll try to wrap up here. What is the basis of the 2.4 meter per second deceleration rate equaling hard braking? Does this compare to AASHTO or ITE? I know that Wejo established that. I don't know how they've tied that to other engineering answers like that. Does anyone?
No, I don't know how they came up with that. Just one important thing to realize is we have the events data, we have the harsh brakes there, and that's what Charlie and Jennifer were using for this project. What we realized at Moonshadow is we really need to derive that data also from the continuous measurement. So at that point, you don't have a single binary yes or no anymore, but you can really start to look at, is this show me everything that decelerates more than 20 miles an hour in 3 seconds, or more than 40, or more than 50. So it becomes much more, the way you can analyze it becomes much more free form, if you like. So, and then we can start to look at things. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Adrian.
Well, I was just going to say to that same point, I mean, that was one of the things we started looking at from a safety perspective, knowing that somebody is slamming on their brakes when they're going 5 or 7 miles an hour is a very different safety issue than somebody that's going 60 miles an hour and slamming on their brakes. So the ability to sort out and filter out those different speed buckets when looking at rapid acceleration and harsh braking answers different kinds of questions. So with that, I think I should go ahead and wrap us up. I'm watching some of the attendees dropping off as we did hit our full hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope this was valuable. Some great questions in here. I hope I answered all of them. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we will be sharing the presentations themselves and the recording with everybody who registered. So thanks again for your time today.
Thank you, Adrian.
All right, drop off.